So, Mark, it's really good to be with you as always, and to delve a bit into your work and what you've been doing, what is ahead for us. And I'd like to have you just start by introducing a little bit about kind of your origin story, where you were born, where you grew up, what were some of the things that kind of made you and influenced the man you've become, and then we'll kind of take off from there into your work.
Cool. Well, I always love to talk about my background because I grew up in Queens in New York in the 50s, which I thought, looking back now, was a great time to be a kid there. Everybody knew everybody in my neighborhood. Even when I tried to be a bad kid, which I wasn't, I was always a good boy. But just to give a quick example of my neighborhood, it's like I remember one Halloween, I wanted to do something radical that nobody would ever think I would do. I think it was about 9. And I got some shaving cream. I stole it from my dad's, toiletry cabinet. And I was determined on Halloween to go spray some car or something, a tree, or believe it, a little bush. That's to show that I was macho. And I remember I was waiting for a car to go by, and I was going to spray paint the car and run like hell back to my apartment and celebrate with some cookies or something. And as soon as I jumped out, there was a woman walking by and goes, "Mark, is that you? Does your mother know?" Well, and I was like, I just ran home like crazy. So that's what I grew up in. It was pretty like tribal, actually. People knew everybody. My dad had lots of men friends. And so he really modeled a lot for me at an early age, like if you're going to get by in life, you need men. And that's not to say that we don't need women. Of course, my mom had her women friends. She would play mahjong in everybody's apartment. They would switch off, and they played cards. The men played cards in the apartments. And when they played in my apartment or my father's apartment, I was allowed to light the cigars for all the men, would pour their drinks, hear them kvetch about their wives and everything. So I just grew up in like men are cool, women are cool, they should be separate some of the time. So those are some of my earliest memories, is just seeing my parents do how they did their marriage, actually. I had great brothers and a sister. When I was really young, up to, I think about age 7, my grandmother, who spoke some English, she was from Kiev, mostly Yiddish. She was in the apartment too. I learned a lot about, of course, I didn't know I was going to grow up to be a philosophy major at comparative religions, but at the age of about 4, she was introducing me into hardcore Stoicism. Like I remember, both my parents worked in the city, so I would come home from school. I remember one day, I call it getting a mugging. I think I was 5. And I said, "Grandma, somebody mugged me, like took my lunch or something." And I was thought, hopefully she'd give me some money, which she would occasionally do, or, send me to the candy store. And she said, like, "You're gonna live." And then I'd come and complain a couple of weeks later, and she says, "It is what it is." So I grew up with this all stoic, all loving, crazy making house or apartment where you heard everybody else's crazy making. One of the things I remember was being very anxious, really anxious. And it was later on when my brothers and sister and I were older, my parents told us that there was a lot of depression in the family, suicide. And so as I became a teenager, I was really heavily getting into Buddhism and yoga, spirituality. And I was just really determined to learn how to deal with my wacky mind. Parents would say, "Oh yeah, Mark, he's such a good boy. He's such a fidgeter." And now that I've been working with young men for 25 years, I realize like every probably diagnosis in the book I had, I don't call it ADHD, I call it short attention span, but I can look back now and connect that dot. So I always had this thing of like I'm really different, and a lot of guys aren't like me. And I was also blessed to have lots of friends because my dad modeled that. So I had a lot of great friends to this day. In our 70s, we all get together every couple of years, and we're mostly still together. It's beautiful. So I was determined to figure out how to deal with my mind, and it got me heavy into Eastern philosophy. And by the time I was 16 or 17, heavily influenced by the Moody Blues and Donovan and a lot of other people who were just, I felt like they were pointing the way for me. I really do. So as our friend Warren Farrell says in his book, The Boy Crisis, he says one of the issues with young men today is they don't have that glint in their eye, meaning, which I had as a teenager when I started reading these books, like I knew what I needed to do. I knew what I needed to be. I wanted to be a healer, definitely wanted to be a teacher because I was already studying with gurus and saints and monks and all that stuff. I already went through the traditional rabbi bar mitzvah thing. So I already knew what I wanted to be, and I didn't know until I started getting into those things that even though I studied with a lot of different teachers and they had all different ways on how to be enlightened, the one thing they always had in common was you have to have a tranquil mind. You got to be calm. So, yeah,
I know that before you started getting involved with boys and men, you way back were interested in healing and helping.
yeah,
And talk a little bit about how you got into the healing arts and kind of what your, what your practices were up until you started moving into some new areas.
yeah. Thank you. So I studied philosophy in college, and then moved to Santa Cruz in the mid 70s. It was like going to a different planet from Queens to Santa Cruz. Hello. It was like, the epitome of just new age, mysticism, anything goes. And that's when I started getting some clarity about, again, I was going to do some teaching, but maybe I was going to be a spiritual teacher, a personal growth teacher, something like that. I got hurt. I was working at a hippie bakery that's still there today. I hurt my shoulder and neck. I went to a chiropractor. And I thought the guy was super cool, which he was. He helped me really quickly. He gave me good advice. I was just so impressed with him that eventually I said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I want to be a chiropractor. Then I went to the UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College for a little bit and realized, oh my God, you have to have like science classes for this. And I'm like a space cadet philosopher. Somehow I made it through, got into chiropractic college up in Portland, Oregon, which was a great place to live and go to school. That's where my second child was born. My first one was born in Santa Cruz. And so I became a chiropractor, always with this kind of sense of I will incorporate stress management or even personal growth somehow. So I moved to San Rafael in '85. I think we met soon after, right? Somewhere in the, I think, late '80s we met. And so my practice was, and still is, focused on stress management. So while I am still doing very part-time, traditional chiropractic, I've combined it with stress management therapy, mostly mindfulness-based meditation and things like that. But in my days in Santa Cruz, I really heavily got into music and sound therapy and vibration and how sound healing worked. And when I went to chiropractic school in Portland, that's where I met your wife. That's where I met Carlin. I was teaching a course at some school called, or a store called Styles for Relaxation. I'm sure she'll remember. And that was a real passion of mine, sound healing. And I combine some of that in my work now, but that was really clear for me that music, sound, vibration, it lined up with my understanding of the nature of reality, which I'm heavily into quantum physics these last 20, 30 years and how everything's vibrating. And it's a major philosophy of all schools of mysticism. So the healing was easy for me because I always wanted to be a teacher and a healer. So I went through chiropractic school, came here. It's hard to believe it's 41 years later. I've been in practice and helped people on a lot of different levels.
Super. And I know you mentioned your kids. You know a little bit about, my story with children.
Yeah,
Carlin and I, at this point in our lives, have six grown children, 17 grandchildren, and
amazing.
three, just four actually. We just had a new great grandchild that was born the last few days. So was always a big part of our lives and part of what really got me into men's work after the birth of our first son in 1969. So talk a little bit. You mentioned your children about how your being a father and having children have impacted your life and what you've learned and what you've gotten from that involvement.
Well, unless you're a parent, you have no idea what parents go through to get their kids launched, right? And even when they are launched, my son's going to be 42 next week. It's still like, I hope he makes it. My daughter too. Like, I hope they can keep going. So there was a book I was introduced to really early on. It's somewhere on my shelf here, but I read it when I was a teenager, first getting into yoga by Swami Rama, called basically householder yoga. Like your children, your wife, your everything's yoga. Everything's your practice. It's your sadhana. It's what you do. So I had some clarity about that this was going to be not separate from my personal growth or spiritual development. It was going to be part of my journey. But as soon as they learned to crawl away from me, that shit went out the window. I just would freak out and scream and do all that stuff I did. Forgot anything I knew about stress management. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out. But the epitome of that was when they were teenagers, because the old school style of parenting that my parents did with me and worked perfectly well, which was very straight in your face and very loving, but very clear, because I said so. That was not working with my kids. And by the time they were tweens, they were already heavily getting involved. This is like their little 90s, somewhere in there. They were getting involved in like Nintendo and Game Boy. And I felt like those devices, the TV screen was their new parent. They were not listening to me. And my ranting certainly wasn't working. And I loved them more than anything else in the world. The way it felt to me, though, honestly, was like I knew they loved me. We had great times, but I would yell a lot and get demonstrative. And I felt like they were on this like a speedboat on a lake, and they were just speeding away from me. And I'm on the shore there with like a broken canoe with one paddle. Like I had no clue how to get to them. And so they really woke me up to I need a new way of parenting. And I definitely needed to heal the relationship with them, especially my son. And that kind of led into, getting a mentor. And I went to, Brad Leslie, my mentor, who I believe you know from our men's background. He had the Young Men's Adventure Weekend in Canada. So that's where I went with my son, Gabe. And when we came back from that journey, I was really clear that I wanted to start a nonprofit and help young men and heal their relationships with their parents because it helped me and Gabe tremendously. And the way it relates to my parenting, though, is like I had already created a method to help people become more enlightened, or what I like to call enlightened. It's the right way method. It stands for 5 virtues: respect, intelligence, grace, humor, and truth. So I had to convert this method to parents because I needed a way to get my kids back. I really did. And it wasn't by making stuff up and yelling, that's for sure. So my children really became my greatest teachers, and they became the source of inspiration for me to help parents, which I do in addition to the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. So, my parents, my children, thank God, they live 5 minutes away, and
Gift.
even though they're in their 40s, when I see them, I kiss them and hug them like they're 5. I'm just so happy to see them and that we're all so close and loving.
That's super. Well, you mentioned the program that you founded, the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, and I'd like you to kind of build on what you've said about I get the origin with wanting something for yourself, which I think is the best way to start any program to say, what do I need, and
Yeah.
finding a way that works to improve your life, and then recognizing, geez, this is something that other families, other moms and dads could use. So uh, tell us a little bit about the origin of the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. How that evolved from the beginning, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of where it's moved to. But
Okay.
say again, how long ago did that begin? The Young Men's Ultimate
The
Weekend?
nonprofit I founded started in 1999. We had our first event in June of 2002. As I mentioned before, when I came back from the Young Men's Adventure Weekend in Vancouver, I was just so impressed. And because as a teenager, part of that glint in my eye was to definitely help other people. And I thought, this is cool. Like I could start a nonprofit and do something like this also. So I came back to Marin here in the Bay Area and was already involved in lots of men's work, men's teams, and men's organizations. And so I called upon a number of friends. We had a meeting here in Marin, and then we moved it to another site, and we had like 80 men show up and a bunch of young men. And so that's when I realized, like, I'm not the only dad having a hard time raising a teenager. And so we just put it out there, like, what can we do to heal this? In the format of a rite of passage. I was very clear that a rite of passage was critical. After I had left Brad's event, I did tons of research. A lot of the books on my shelf and certainly at home were about tribal life, what tribal life was like. And so that's when I called upon some key close men in my life and said I wanted to do this, and they were all instrumental because I'm more of a dreamer. Those guys that I asked were all administrative go-getters, and they got stuff done. So I put together this committee. We met with other men and young men. We put on our first event in June 2000 out in Fairfax, Camp Tamarancho. We had no idea, I mean, no idea how many young men would show up. I was damn sure my son Gabe was going to be there, that's for sure, or I'd cut off his allowance. So he showed up, and he brought 4 friends. And we were in the parking lot of this, like Albertsons or something like that, some grocery store, and 205 parents or families showed up with young dudes.
That's just take a moment to, let that sink in. Just 205 parents with their young. And what are the ages of the young dudes, the sons at that point?
13, well, the first one was 8 to 20.
To 20. Okay, so quite a range, 8 to 20. So back up a half step. So if I were one of those parents, and I could have been, and how would I have found out about this? And what did it say? What would have caught my eye that made me go, hey, I want to be there?
So you mean back in the day before we had social media and ways to get things
Well,
out?
yeah, I mean, when it started, how did that number of people find out about it? And if I had been there, what would I have found that was interesting or compelling enough? So I want to get a sense of what even back then, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more compelling reasons now, but even in 2000, so we're talking 25 years ago,
Yeah.
uh, what would that like? Give me a little how would I have known about it? What would it said, and
Hmm?
what got me to show up with my
Right.
8, 9, 10, or whatever year old kid,
Trusting total
male
strangers with
boy
your
I had.
son. Yeah. What would get someone to trust total strangers with their son?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, first of all, I will say when those 205 people showed up, I looked at my close friend Steven. He was a co-founder. He was very grounding. I was like, there goes my license. Like, we can't, well, there's no way we can do this. I'm going to lose we were way in over our head. He made me sit down and do my meditation and relax, and he handled most of it. But the way we got people there was word of mouth. We had no budget. We had no money. It was all word of mouth.
the words that got shared that got so many people to come.
They were
What'd you tell
essentially,
them they were going to get if they showed up?
essentially was don't lose. Well, how do I phrase it? I forget the catchphrase, but it was like,
Yeah, whatever.
yeah. Before the modern world, before digital devices, before the TVs, before screens steal your kids, we need to bring back an ancient forgotten practice called rite of passage. And that's what's missing in the culture. And that's what I would tell the parents. And I would say that biologically, something goes off in a young woman or a young man when they go through a rite of passage that activates their nervous system to want to become more responsible and more accountable and more resilient and be a hero and get out there and be their own man in a healthy, good way. And that's what's missing.
You've used that term rite of passage. I'm not sure everybody understands. It's gotten into the vocabulary. I think everybody has a general idea what that is, but what was the ancient rite of passage idea that you were letting people know, hey, we need that because we're losing kids into the digital and other worlds because they don't have that.
Well, you made a good statement there about rite of passage. In the year 2000, it was not as well used as it is now. So,
Exactly.
like
So
we'd be at farmers markets, right here in San Rafael. We had a beautiful booth. We spent every penny we had on a beautiful booth, and parents would walk by and we go, "We see that you have a teenager. Would you come like to learn about how we can help you and your son like really have great relationships and move on?" And they would look at the sign, it said rite of passage, and they go, "We're fine. No, we're fine," and go get some popcorn down the road or something. So we stopped using that term in public for a while, and we called it an adventure camp. Okay, so now it's like a summer camp. It's only a weekend, and now people were a little bit more interested. So now we call it a rite of passage adventure camp.
rites of passage have been part of human, indigenous cultures for, thousands of years and are part of how, as you say, young males and females get initiated into adulthood.
Yep.
And that's been part of the human condition. But uh, that's, in a sense, what you were tapping into
Oh,
was
100%.
that ancient tradition and bringing it back to life in a new form.
Yep. And I had this great opportunity after a few years of starting YMEW and some experience. I had a chance to go to Africa and it was, as a tourist. However, I got very lucky. I fell in at one of the places where I was with some young men who were from this small Samburu tribe nearby. And they spoke English because they worked at this place. And so one night I think they were drumming, and I'm a drummer, musician. So I asked them if I could sit with them and drum, which I did. And so of course, and they were all teenagers. So this was my way of saying, I got you. Um, so we just started talking. It was really beautiful. And so they, at one point, um, led me to their tribe. I got permission to go, and some other people went. And I spoke to the shaman, and I was with these young men. And so, of course, I asked about rite of passage, and the shaman was not about to tell me what actually happened there. Neither were the young men. They were sworn to secrecy, and they told me all the benefits for the community, for the tribe. And so the research that I had done on rite of passage on my own before meeting these people really came alive, because I'm reading in these books what it must have been like, tens of thousands of years ago. And so now I'm out there in the middle of nowhere. They hardly had anything, really. I mean, literally dirt poor, you could say, and yet were the happiest, healthiest people had ever met. So that really gave me the juice to kind of keep going with this. It was not going to be a hobby. And then a year or two later, I realized the parents need a rite of passage. It's not just the children. Like, parenting had changed so much from the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, early 80s, that the parents needed a rite of passage. And so I started doing rite of passages, and still do, for the parents, not the entire weekend. The parents come on the first night for a few hours, and I lead them in a very powerful ceremony where they get to let go of their son as their boy. And there's lots of crying and lots of tears, and just a lot of ceremonies. And that's the first night. And then they come back on the last day for a bunch of hours before they see their sons. And it's more on the tools, like how to stay calm with your son, how to use brain science to communicate to a teen brain, how to use consequences in a positive, disciplined way, like many things. There's like 12 destinations, I call them, on my my Right Way roadmap. So that is when things really got way better. We'd start getting feedback from families, not just young men occasionally saying, "Hey, doc, that was really great. Thank you for turning my life around." There was plenty of those, but having families starting to email us saying, "How'd you do this in a weekend? My son wants to help out now, blah, 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 blah." We're not yelling anymore. We're like tighter than ever. So having the Ultimate Parenting Weekend and the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend these last 15 years now has been really amazing, because I am more convinced than ever that before it gets too late, and before AI and the digital world tears families apart any more than they already are, which they really are, to me, that's the real pandemic, that we need to come back to this ancient, forgotten practice.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how many of the weekends have you put on now in these many years, and how many young men and their families have gone through the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend?
Sure. And before I do, I just want to say, with what we do at the weekend, there's three things that I would like everybody to hear. It's
Yeah.
important, okay? This is what I learned from all the spiritual teachers that I studied with, and from this shaman in Kenya, and through all the books. Every tribe had a way. They had a path to ensure everybody's survival, let alone, having them all thrive. Every teacher I ever studied with that I admired and respected, they had a way. They weren't just making things up on the spot. So the rite of passage has to have, you have to have a rite of passage, you have to have a way, and you have to have mentors. Those three things are critical. And mentors, not just at the rite of passage, but just like in a tribe, the young men are returned, the young women are returned to the adults, the mentors, right? So those are the three things I just wanted to get out that are really critical,
Yeah.
that families will help families now, because I'm a mentor to families all around the world. And I'm just basically teaching them how to instill their old school values into modern dudes, basically. And so, yes, we've had about, I think it's 4,500 young men have attended over the years. We've put on about 50 plus events. When we were younger, we would drive, pack up the trucks and go to Seattle. We did one. We'd go to LA sometimes, San Diego. We were like in our 40s and 50s. We just loved it. Now we do one a year. However, that's going to change now, because our nonprofit is just celebrated 25 years. And we now have a lot of, I'm calling them young men, guys in their 30s and 40s who've been with us 8 to 10 years. And they're taking over my job, thank God. So I have more time to do what I need to do, like write books and teach more. But they're taking over. And we anticipate in the next few years that really it's even possible. So we'll have more in California certainly soon. My vision is that we spearhead a movement around the world, certainly in America, where we have rite of passage season every year. And that every year in every state, YMUW is putting on an event somewhere in that state, ideally at the same time, so everybody knows that they can send their son. And one day we want to do it for young women, of course, as well. So that's about how many young men we've had so far.
Super. Well, I know there was I believe, a CNN program. This is Life with Lisa Ling,
Yeah,
very well-known commentator who came and they did some filming, interviewing for the weekend, and that kind of brought uh, the weekend to a much larger audience. Can you share a little bit about how that came to be and what was that
sure.
like to do, and what's kind of the
Yeah,
effect of that since that
thank you.
that event happened and then was filmed and shown
Yeah,
nationwide for sure, maybe
all around the
all over the
world.
world.
We got
Yeah,
emails. We had hundreds of emails within a few days all around the world.
yeah.
Well, I want to thank our friends John Gray and Warren Farrell because they wrote the book Boy Crisis and mentioned us in there. And so Lisa actually had called Warren first, and very long story short, basically he deferred to Young Men's Ultimate Weekend and suggested that Lisa give us a call.
Mhm.
So, which she did, of course. Now, I mean, the only things I watch on TV basically are sports and, videos of teachers I want to see. So when her staff called and said, "Hey, this is Lisa Ling's crew," and I'm like, "Lisa who?" I thought I was going to hang up. Like, is this a phone? Well, who is this person? So that didn't go well. But they stuck with me, and we spoke. I spoke to some of her staff members first, and they were just amazing. They really got what we were doing. They really got the idea of workshop for a weekend or a rite of passage for parents and young men was probably pretty unique. And so she was amazing. When I finally did speak with her, she was amazing. But she had one request slash demand. She wanted to meet with a number of parents that I had already worked with as a family mentor, and wanted to make sure that like I was actually getting results. She wanted to know. And so she called a bunch of families that I had been mentoring, and thankfully they said all the right things. And that's what convinced her to come out there. And so at our training, because before the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, the men have to go through a training with me and other leaders. And I announced, this is like 3 weeks before the event, I said, there's going to be a woman there. We've never had a woman there, not because we hate women, right? We love women. And it's an all-male event for all the right reasons. So I said, it's Lisa Ling from CNN, and it's going to be amazing. She's going to actually film what we do and help us get out, not only our message out, but all the organizations like Brad and others, because there's so many good organizations out there. She's going to get the word out for Rite of Passage. I'm sure she's going to like it. And about 25% of the men stood up and said, F you to me. There's no women, no way we're going to have it. My closest friend, Steven, who helped me start the nonprofit, because he knows I'm an integrator, I'll try to like work something out with them. And he just made me sit down and said, you can go now. That's what he said. You can leave. And they all stayed. And we all, they all behaved because they all knew that this was an amazing opportunity because these are great men I work with. There's no way I'm sitting here talking to you about YMEW without 20 or 30 other amazing local men who've made this happen, and women for that matter. So that's how it came to be.
Interject, Mark, because I want people to really understand that the what goes on in the weekend. We know we've got the boys, we've got the parents and we've got you who's articulating kind of the overall and the founding. But in the actual weekend, there are uh, quite a number of, you've mentioned, men who are part of the team that creates the experience. Am I right?
Absolutely.
How many other people, both there's some people that are in the planning that are there beforehand, and then there's men that are part of the weekend experience while they're all together. Kind of say a little more about that so people can get a more of a feel for if you watch the
Oh, no,
Lisa Ling, you get a feel of
yeah.
all of that. But
Mhm.
yeah, say
Absolutely.
more about it.
Absolutely. Most of the men who are at the YMEW at the event are on the board or, the ones planning, like we all do it all. which is amazing. So this incredible continuity of what's happening. All the men go through a training, a full day training, plus other trainings to even be allowed to be there with the young men. There are other men who are not with the young men. They're cooking and doing other, important jobs. But everybody's heavily trained to be there. So I definitely want to put that out there. And the bonding is really critical so that when the young men show up, we like to call it, when the parents are dropping off their son, we call it sniffing. The young men are sniffing the adults are standing there sniffing them. Everybody's kind of like, we
Get
see
each other out.
everybody's
What's it
sniffing.
feel like? What's it
But
smell like? Yeah.
totally. So we know so we have a 1-to-1 ratio basically of men to young men, to answer one of your questions.
Yeah.
It's really critical. They need to know that we're not outnumbered. They need to know
Yeah.
that. It's important. And I'm not saying that in any physical or violent way. We've never had a fight. I'm just saying that they need to know that men care for them
Yeah.
and we'll take good care of them and that we're there
Mm,
just for them. Because these men have left their wives and children to be there too, right?
exactly.
So that's really, really important. I can give you a quick overview, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes, of what happens from beginning to end, if you want.
Let's hold that for a minute and let's I want to get a more of a sense of the container that gets created, the value of it. And you mentioned there's a number of other programs that do good work, but I'd like you to say a little bit more, and maybe it gets into the detail you're going to share about what distinguishes Young Men's Ultimate Weekend from many other good programs and some not so good programs that are out there. And particularly as we're going to get in, you're talking about what's in the future of what you'd like to see, which is very expanded. I want to give people more of a sense of why this program has been successful for so long,
Thank you.
why it's been, in a sense, vetted by a number of
Yeah, yeah.
people, experts in the field, and what its foundation is. So say a little more about that, and then maybe a
Okay.
quick kind of
Sure.
rundown of like what goes on that you could share. That some of it's private, some of it's part of
Hmm?
the experience, but what you can share. Go ahead.
Well, what makes us, I don't say different from many other organizations, because I'm sure other organizations use something similar to what we do. We have a very clear way. Everything's based on 5 virtues. Volunteers don't make shit up there, right? They're trained, and they love this because it helps their personal growth and spiritual development as well. When we formed this event 25 years ago in the nonprofit, it was based on the understanding that we're going to be there for our volunteers to personally grow and become happier and healthier men. That's why we have so many volunteers. They don't leave because they love the organization. So we really base everything on 5 virtues. And those virtues, respect, intelligence, gallantry, we use for the men, humor, and true. They're,
Slow down on those. You got your New York
I know, I know,
exuberance, and
I know.
so say those slowly because those are
Thank you.
important, and I want to have people really hear all 5.
Thank you. Everything is founded on respect. We have to respect ourselves, otherwise nobody else will. We have to respect,
That's the one,
that's
respect,
the first form of respect, then you have to respect others.
right?
To start, with no questions asked, hold everybody in the highest regard, and to respect the earth and reality itself. So that's what we all have in common, and that's what we're educating about. Whatever events we have are all revealing those 5 virtues.
So, list the 5 virtues again. Respect, is that one? Okay.
Intelligence, which we define or give the value as applying your intuition and your experience as the source of your wisdom. So we encourage the young men, the activities that we have help them go inside and discover their own intuition or wisdom or experience that would reveal their wisdom, and they have a safe place to reveal it, let alone go access it. They can actually bring it out and feel safe, right?
Number 2.
Number 3 is gallantry, which we give the value. So that's the virtue. The value or the definition is heartful acts of courtesy and courage, right? So we're educating the young men about there's times to be acquiescing and just move back, like let your mom, let your sister, let somebody in your life, let them win. It's okay. Hold the door open for them, whatever. And they get to do that with each other at the events too. They have to practice acquiescing. And then there's courage, where they get a lot of events to go beat their chest and go get it. Hardcore. obstacle courses and things like that. And so we show them that to be a balanced man is you have to regulate those two virtues of courtesy and courage, right? So that's the third virtue.
Right. So what are all five?
So there's four. Four is humor.
Humor. Okay.
Okay, so here's what we put in humor. So to me, the way I define or give the value of humor is amusement. Amusement with celebration and gratitude. That's how I define
Mhm.
it. Okay. So when you talk about amusing, you're turning off the muse. You're out of your head, right? So just like now, when you laugh, you can't help but be out of your head in a certain way. You're laughing, right? It's
Yeah.
considered humorous, right? But I include meditation as part of humor, like when you're out of your thinking head and you're just focused on one thing.
Yeah.
So we teach the young men meditation. We have a lot of fun as a way to demonstrate amusement. And I'm amazed at what young men come up with or say. Some of their jokes about fun. It's really funny. They love to have freedom to be humorous. So we let them know that humor is the great relief valve. You have to know when to bring humor in and get out of your head. And then five is true, not truth, Truth. We don't do truth. We do true. And so at the weekend, true is like we help them being a life coach for many decades, and the way we train the men, they're really expert at helping young men go within and discover what's their virtues, what's true for them, even if it's not going to be popular with other people. So we're really big on helping them discover what's true for them while also acquiescing to or respecting the virtues that we expect them to live by there. So that's what's true for us, that we have a code, we have a way. And if they don't, there'll be consequences. That's part of the way. And they respect the consequences and they just do them right away because they get that they have to get back into integrity if we're going to function as a group of males who can get a lot of good things done where everybody leaves way more enlightened than when they came in.
So good. So if I understand right, I want to kind of move into what's coming and where the next phases are. So if I understand right now you're doing one a year in California,
Yep.
uh, but you've got plans for, I love this concept of having, a time of the year where these things go on all over the world, which would have been traditional in indigenous cultures for, thousands of years. There would have been regular rites of passage that young men at a certain age would have engaged in, and there was uh, going on everywhere that humans were. So tell us more about that idea and what you anticipate, for the future in this coming years.
Well, I anticipate definitely putting on Young Women's Ultimate Weekends at some point now that we're 25 years old and feel like we know what we're doing now. We're finally getting into fundraising because it's going to take a lot of money to pull that off. So
Mhm.
that's part of our vision is to do these Young Women's Weekends. And my big vision is that we'd have our own land someday where on one part of the property, young men are going through their rite of passage, young women are going through theirs on one part of the property and parents on another. And then at the end of the whole event, we bring them all together. And so they can have caring and
Let me
cooperative.
stop you right there because you're raising an interesting idea that I'm interested in since I have sons and daughters. I've got grandsons and granddaughters. And I was kind of raised at a time where people were people, but it was very obvious that boy people were different from girl people. And I still believe that, there's much we have in common as humans, but there really are unique things about the way male brains work that are different from females, lots of new science about. So say just a
Yeah.
little bit about as you anticipate rites of passage for young women, now that you've had 25 years of rites of passage for young men, what are some of the differences that you see that would then get put into presumably a different, there'd be some similarities, but some differences between what young women, young girls would go through from what young boys go through.
All right. So let me begin by saying, like, I understand what you're talking about as far as the brain science of sex, right? So you and I are in agreement. There are differences between men and women, right? So we totally respect that. And I also know this is just what's true for me, that certain virtues tie men and women together in a healthy way. So that's how I see that we're the same, right? So like when men and women can learn to work together, which is one of our goals, based on, respect and generosity and cooperation, and not on like what's being modeled to them, which is, you know, hatred, greed, and domination. So yes, there's differences between the sexes, and there's virtues that unite us. So a lot of the same principles, in fact, all the same principles would be taught at the Young Women's Ultimate Weekend. And yes, you're right. Some of the practices would have to be different to get those virtues demonstrated, right?
I presume just in the way that you have males that are,
Absolutely,
in the weekend with the boys, there would be females in the weekend with the girls, right? And
100% right.
yeah, and there
And
would be parents that would come that would be main males and female type parents. But so just since you're the guy talking, I want to make it clear.
oh yeah, I want
And
to be clear
I
too.
know there's a lot
I
of
have
women
no business
involved than
being
there
there.
would be in the ultimate young women's weekend. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
so
So
that's
the women, there's some women already who are really interested in that work, of course, and they
perfect.
would be trained in technology because it's very real, practical
Yeah,
technology. And yes, women would run that, of course. And at the end, we'd all be coming together to show that whether you're the parents,
yeah,
the young man, or the young woman, these five virtues will keep you together. And I can
yeah,
say this with goosebumps because I do believe that when
yeah,
whole families are really operating at a high functioning level with lots of love and joy and productivity and
yeah.
mindfulness and all that good stuff, we will change the world in a healthier way. There's just no doubt.
Man,
If it
that's a
doesn't come
great
out of
vision.
families, it's not going to happen
That's a great vision. We need it more than ever, I
more
think, in
than
this
ever.
time of human history. So as we're kind of wrapping up our time together, uh, I'd like you to share, and I'll share more of this when I present this, but how people can reach you now and can stay in touch with what is going to be evolving and how people can find out both more about what they can get involved in now, because there are things that are happening now and what is evolving for the future.
Absolutely. There's two ways, both equally good. info@ymuw.org will get you in touch with the nonprofit. Anybody can ask, what are we doing, or get on our mailing list, which is what I recommend. I write those blogs so people will hear what we're up to. Or info@challengingteenagesons.com. Info@challengingteenagesons.com. That would come directly to me for my work as a family mentor, where I'm working with parents and their teenagers, young men and young daughters. And then you can come on my blog, that specific blog, which gets all the advice out to parents on how to raise their teenagers. The main thing, honestly, is that if parents get in touch with us, like we have great staff, like we will get right back to people. We'll answer their questions year round. Sooner than later, one of my visions is to just year round have what I call preview calls. But certainly, since we have our YMEW coming out in June, if you contact us, we will be able to tell you the dates that I go live, bunch of nights between now and then, to answer everybody's questions. I also want to say that challenging teenage sons, parents, I really want them to hear this. Challenging teenage sons does not mean that your sons are challenging. Because when I speak to your sons, they think you're the ones who are challenging. Okay. So it's not that. Okay. Challenging teenage sons means as a culture, we have forgotten how to challenge or arouse our teen young men and young women, for that matter, to be the kind of young people where they can reach their potential, have their confidence, that they can get out into the world in a really good way. So it means that we need to do a better job culturally helping our teens get out there in a good way.
Super. Well, this has been a joy and a pleasure to both get caught up with what some of the origin of some of your work, where things are now, and what's evolving for the future, because this is truly exciting, truly needed, and can't wait to keep getting updates as more of the ideas that you've developed over the years come into new forms and reach out to a broader, level of community. And I must say too, just the vision that you have about males and females, I think is quite unique. I'm sure there are other people that are thinking this way, but I know that so much still is separate. There's a lot of things that are going on for men and young men and, and focused on men's health and women and separate things for women. And this is really one of the first concepts of recognizing, yes, males and females are different, but their values and the way that we need to live together and work together have underlying, values and similarities, and we need to put those into practice in our lives and in our world. What would our world be like if this could be a model for how everybody grows up in society, not only in the United States, but throughout the world?
Absolutely. What I've learned after all these years of observing, families and now young men is that, like I always tell young men, I'll make you a deal. If you are willing to learn how to adapt certain virtues in your family and in the world, like to be more responsible or accountable, I will show you how to discover your own virtues and how to be authentic. So there's authenticity and there's conformity. And if you teach young people how to do both at the same time, they'll do anything you ask them to do.
Mark, well, I want to thank you for this very lively and went very fast dialogue and discussion, and I hope we can do more of this again in the future.
Thank you. And thank you for being one of my mentors. Really, thank
Well,
you.
thank you for continuing to be one of the brothers in this movement that are
Totally.
doing such great work.
Thank you.